We now know that J. Garcia Saturn is the name of one of the Gorosei, but if you're a Japanese speaker, this name has massive consequences, as the specific kanji that is used and the secret etymology of the word Gorosei in Japanese is such a big deal that, no joke, and I'm not exaggerating this time, it tells us the true identities of not just the Gorosei, but also who King Imu-sama really is. If you don't speak Japanese, you would miss out on this massive reveal that potentially changes our very understanding of this series so far, but since I do, allow me to break it down for you. So what does the word Gorosei even actually mean? Well, its etymology holds a massive secret that you likely never knew about if you don't speak the language. So in Japanese, Gorosei is formed by three kanji, Go, Ro, and Se. The first, Go, is quite simply the Japanese number 5, while the term Ro refers to elder, which make their name so far the Five Elders, the official English name Oda has used in the manga too. However, the final term is a lot more tricky because it's Se, which means star. This has led most to translate their names as Five Elder Stars, but that's technically not a correct translation, because the word Se in Japanese does not just refer to stars. You see, in English we tend to differentiate celestial bodies with different terms. We have stars, planets, satellites, etc., but in Japanese, at least in a non-scientific setting, a single word is used to encompass all of them, Se. This is mostly because in older times, when this etymology was first made, there wasn't such distinction, in the same way that in English we sometimes also refer to planets as the stars in the sky. So Se can mean stars, but also refers to planets or satellites, essentially all and any celestial bodies we can see in the skies. So in this case, their name isn't translated as Five Elder Stars, but actually the Five Elder Planets, which, if we take into account this Gorosei's name, it suddenly makes a lot more sense. But you see, Gorosei, or the Five Elder Planets, is actually referring to a very specific astrological element that existed in real life. This is because in ancient times, the necessary tools needed to be able to identify the planets in our solar system further away than Saturn did not yet exist. The three farthest planets of our solar system were only discovered in the past 3 centuries, which means that prior to that, only the first 5 planets were visible and identified as such, which is why they are commonly referred to as the Five Elder Planets, or the 5 planets in the old astrological system. So the term Gorosei quite literally refers to how the planets of our solar system were classified in ancient times. In fact, this could potentially also be reflected in the One Piece world in the globe we saw at the Library of Ohara, which many mistake as being multiple moons, despite the fact that there is only one moon in the One Piece world, but actually this is likely to be the one singular moon, in addition to, you guessed it, 5 elder planets that form the solar system. However, this goes way deeper, as this chapter reveals that one of the Gorosei is called J. Garcia Saturn Sei. Now, for starters, the Sei here is commonly translated as saint in English, as, in case you didn't know, the Gorosei were confirmed to be celestial dragons, the highest ranking among them. Though saint isn't really the most accurate translation in this context, as you could more directly translate it as His Holiness, or quite literally just God, because it's a Japanese title that refers to a god, someone holy, which makes sense since the celestial dragons are currently considered to be the gods of this world rather than just saints, so this god title is to indicate their holiness. Similarly, Marijua is referred to as the Holy Land Marijua, but a more literal translation may be that of a god land Marijua, the land of the gods. This would make this Gorosei, god Saturn, part of the J. Garcia family, which would supposedly be one of the 20 founding families of the world government, alongside the Nefertari and Don Quixote families, as well as the Figure Land if those are celestial dragons too. Interestingly, much like Don Quixote, Garcia is a name of Spanish origin, but either way, as you may have realized, Se is not just the word for His Holiness or God, because if written with different kanji, just like we mentioned before, Se becomes star or planet. So quite literally, Oda is likely using this term as a play on words, as his name can be read as both God Saturn as well as planet Saturn. So the obvious conclusion that you can come from this name is that, much like the name Five Elder Planets itself suggests, each of the Gorosei is named after the 5 elder planets that compose the ancient understanding of the solar system. While we can't deduce the family names of the other one yet, of course, it's a safe guess that their names will be God Jupiter, God Mars, God Venus, and God Mercury. However, as you'll likely know, through modern science we discovered that the 5 elder planets are not the only planets of our solar system, as across the past centuries, 3 additional planets were identified. Now, it's very important to keep in mind that in 2006, the scientific community agreed that the last planet, Pluton, did not qualify for the standards of planet, so it was removed from the category of being a planet, but it should be noted that this decision was made well after the Gorosei were introduced in the manga, meaning that the vision that Oda had of all the planets 20 years ago is still the old version where Pluton is still included, so keep that in mind. Which would leave us with the 3 final planets of the solar system: Uranus, Poseidon, and Pluton. And those names should sound very familiar because in One Piece, these are the names of the 3 ancient weapons. And combining the 5 elder planets with the 3 ancient weapons gives us all the planets of our solar system. This further adds up by the fact that the 3 ancient weapons, Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus, were all named after 3 gods within the One Piece world. But this goes double in the fact that the same holds true for our world, as Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus, the planets, are not just the names of planets, but the names of 3 Greco-Roman gods, which represent the trinity of the planes, being the skies, the oceans, and the underworld, above, middle, and below. And this further extends to the 5 elder planets as well too, as all the planets in our system are named after the Greco-Roman pantheon of gods. Now keep in mind, both Greek and Roman pantheons technically have slightly different figures, each language featuring different names for the gods, which is why you may hear 2 differently interchangeable names, such as the planet Neptune sometimes being called Poseidon and vice versa, but these gods are generally grouped together as the same figures, so let's go down the list of each planet and each of the gods they represent. For starters, as mentioned, the final 3 planets represent the trinity that ruled over the 3 planes. First, Pluton, or Pluto, alternatively also Hades, was the god of the underworld, associated with the afterlife and the dead. Poseidon, or Neptune, was the god of the oceans, embodying the sea, storms, and earthquakes. Uranus, or Chelus, was the god of the skies, associated with heaven and weather. Now, as for the 5 elder planets, they are also named after Olympian gods. Saturn, or Cronus, was the god of time as well as agriculture. Jupiter, or Zeus, was the god of thunder and also the chief of the Olympian gods. Mars, or Ares, was the god of war, embodying both courage and bloodlust. Venus, or Aphrodite, was the goddess of love, also including beauty and fertility. And finally, Mercury, or Hermes, was the god of wealth, blessing both merchants and thieves alike. Furthermore, I think it's also worth bringing up the Japanese names of the planets, as they are also likely to be referenced in the story. The 5 elder planets were originally named after elements that match the color in which they appeared in the skies, named after the 5 elements of Eastern belief that surround the yin and yang. Mercury is called Suise, or water planet, Venus is called Kinsei, or metal planet, Mars is called Kase, or fire planet, Jupiter is called Mokusei, or wood planet, and Saturn is called Dosei, or earth planet. However, the final 3 planets, since they were discovered in more recent times, as we explained, were given names based on their Greco-Roman counterparts translated in Japanese, referring to the trinity of gods and their respective planes. Uranus is Tennose, or Sky King planet, Poseidon is Kaiose, or Sea King planet, and Pluton is Meose, or Underworld King planet. Does this start to make more sense now? Shirahoshi is quite literally Poseidon because in Japanese the planet is called Sea King planet, so Shirahoshi is the king of all sea kings. Similarly, Uranus can translate to Sky King, though Ten can also be the heavens, while Me is the underworld but can also refer to darkness itself, which makes sense since Pluton is said to be encased beneath the ground under Wano, quite literally the underworld, and also means that Uranus is likely to be associated in some form, even if just vaguely, to the skies. This would further the theory that all ancient weapons are actual people, or that at least there is always a necessary human key to each of the ancient weapons in order to use them, one of the respective gods. This is corroborated by the fact that the Gorosei themselves mention how the borders of the Wano country and the unleashing of Pluton could only be caused by Zunisha, who only Momonosuke can control. Ninda Momonosuke is the stand-in for the god Pluton, as he is the only person who Zunisha will obey, since it was noted that not even Odin could get Zunisha to listen to him, with Momo being the only person capable of unleashing Pluton upon the world, which is specifically why Yamato and Odin noted that it was essential for Momonosuke to stay alive for the sake of the dawn of the world. One Piece Odyssey even builds up further upon this, as it's revealed in the game that in ancient times, a tribe offshoot from the Burkans also created a fourth additional ancient weapon of sorts, known as God's Breath, or the Breath of the Gods, said to be capable of destroying the world as well, though it likely was made more as a countermeasure outside of the original three ancient weapons. This weapon consisted of a giant technologically advanced robot in the shape of a goldfish, which could control and unleash any type of weather upon the world. And similarly, it would only listen to the orders of a prominent figure within their culture, being the Sky Priestess, with the one that originally existed supposedly in the Void Century, known by the name of Rita Suerte. Through technology of the ancient kingdom, Rita has made it all the way to the present story, being reborn under the form of the young girl Im, now the new Sky Priestess, something that matches fairly similarly to the stories of people like Shirahoshi or Momonosuke, which also match being royal heirs of kingdoms who were part of the ancient kingdom, now reborn in the present to be guided by a new joy boy to change the world and bring its dawn. But if we're talking about gods of the One Piece world, are we not forgetting about what is potentially the most important god of the series? Of course, that would be God Usopp. Of course, that would be Nika, also called by some as the sun god Nika, which of course would complete the pantheon as the most important element of the solar system, being the sun itself. And it's fitting because Nike, occasionally called Nika as well, was also a goddess in Greek mythology, being the goddess of victory, meaning that potentially during the Void Century, this is the pantheon of gods that people revered. The trinity of gods, Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus, the five elder gods, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury, and most importantly, the sun god Nika. But among all those, we are leaving one final deity and one final planet behind. Of course, our home planet, the Earth. The Earth, or in Japanese Chikyu, quite literally Earth globe, is also associated with a deity in Greco-Roman mythology, Gaia or Terra, the goddess of the Earth, also known as the Mother of Nature. Does that sound familiar? Because of course this is also a deity in the One Piece world. There is a figure that is quite literally called Mother of Nature, much like Gaia, that is referred to being the sea itself, or as it is called in the original Japanese version, Umi, the sea. And when read backwards, the word sea, the name Umi, becomes Imu, meaning that Imu-sama could quite veritably be the figure that some revered as the deity Mother of Nature Umi, placing it right alongside the Gorosei within the gods of the One Piece world, leaving us with a pantheon composed by the Sun God, the three ancient weapons on one side, and the Gorosei and Mother Nature Umi on the other. While modern technology proves that the 9 planets revolve around the Sun, in ancient times it was believed that the 5 elder planets revolved around the Earth, or in this case, Imu-sama, which explains why the Gorosei quite literally revolve around Mother Nature herself, Imu-sama. So then, who exactly are the Gorosei? Well, it's easy to jump to the conclusion that they are beings from the Void Century, especially being named after its gods, though we still need to maintain the possibility that they are simply elected from the most prominent of celestial dragons to fulfill the position, thus inheriting the title of a planet as their new name. But still, the possibility that they may be perennially youthful beings who have been alive ever since the Void Century is certainly an alluring idea as well. Many people also believe Imu-sama to be a perennially youthful being from the Void Century, which would fit if they are really the Mother of Nature Umi. But this does bring into question as to how all 6 of them could be perennially youthful, as the Ope-Ope-no-Mi could only grant that power to one person theoretically. There's a theory I really like that we talked about in the last One Piece YouTuber Reverie, which was brought up by The Hidden Island, in which we discussed if the Gorosei could actually be satellites of Imu. After all, Vegapunk must have gotten the technology to split into satellites from the Void Century, meaning someone might have used it before back then, and it would be very fitting if the Gorosei so far were all parts of Imu-sama operating on their behalf, and would even explain why they are all perennially youthful. After all, satellites can also be called sei, so the Gorosei could quite literally be considered 5 elder satellites, much like the punks. Really, the only hole in this theory would be why would the Gorosei have family names that seem to be part of the celestial dragon families, but I'm sure that could be explained too. Still though, if Imu-sama is the mother of nature Umi, this could potentially reframe a lot of the myth of the Void Century, because Vegapunk said, according to the myth, since Devil Fruits allow people to evolve way beyond what is naturally possible, these unnatural creations, or even more literally, artificial creations, earned the ire of the mother of all things natural, the mother of nature, the sea Umi. This ire made the sea reject Devil Fruit users, causing them to drown within it. When you think about it, this makes a lot of sense, because all evolution started from the sea. Life on Earth first began in the water, and then creatures moved on to land. So with Devil Fruits, humanity evolved far into the future. The sea was so irritated by humans playing at being God, by taking evolution into their own hands, that it rejected them from going back into the sea. Quite literally, humans had evolved so far they could not go back, not being able to return to the water from where they first came from. But of course, that's just what the myth says. And if Umi is really Imu, then that could reframe a lot of the truth, because a more literal way to interpret this is that the ancient kingdom, developing the technology of the Devil Fruits through the application of the bloodline elements, earned the ire of Imu, who did something to paralyze them when they enter in water. And this becomes a lot more complicated when we go back to the original myth of Devil Fruits, which was told to us by Shanks in chapter 19, where he claimed that the Devil's Fruits are all the incarnations of the Devil of the Sea. But the interesting thing is that here Shanks attributed the devil as being of the sea. I've been thinking about this for a very long while. In fact, I even talked about it 3 years ago in my fan manga Return to the Reverie, where I said all of this word by word. But could this potentially mean that the devil is actually the sea itself? Are the devil and Imu the same person? Because when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. You see, when we're talking about gods, we have to think about the oldest gods of the Void Century, the Lunaria. Through their advanced technology, the Lunaria were able to develop such powerful bodies to the point that the people began to call them as gods. As such, their home country came to be known as the God Country atop the Red Line. Some revered them as such, while others feared them or envied them. It is quite likely that the sky culture of gods is also the reason why Skypiea referred to the ruler under the position of god as well, which led to the whole thing with Enno. The thing is, though, on the opposite side, the human kings who would later go on to become the celestial dragons were instead referred to as devils, as their deeds were so wicked and cruel that they were perceived by many as such. So if Imu or Umi, who united and led the 20 kings under her to defeat the gods of the God Country and the Sun God, was known as the Devil of the Sea, it would fit perfectly, because after the Void Century, history was rewritten and the roles were swapped. The 20 kings and Imu, originally branded as devils, went on to ascend to Marijua to become the new gods of the world, whereas the old gods, the people of the ancient kingdom, went on to become known as devils, an association that became given to anyone trying to unearth the true history, such as the devils of Ahara or the devil child Nico Robin. Or in other words, they became the devils, the D clan, the natural enemies of the gods. One could surmise as such that the D clan is the Devil clan, though personally I think that the D means something quite different, and this is simply the twisted meaning that the world government would give them. And suddenly, when you think about it, everything makes sense. Because the God Country was replaced with the new God land, Marijua. And have you never wondered what Marijua actually means? Joie is derived from the term bourgeois, which refers to the high class of society, or in other words, someone up high in standing. However, joie here is written in the singular feminine form of French, meaning that it's referring to a single female person high up in power. And who is this certain female? Well, of course, Mary. Now, you'd be forgiven to think that Mary is just the name of a person, but it's actually Latin, the Latin word for sea. So quite literally, Marijua refers to a female of high standing referred to as the sea, or in other words, Umi, now known as Imu-sama, the ruler of the world.